We are the Church of the Larger Fellowship, a Unitarian Universalist congregation with no geographical boundary, working toward creating a global spiritual community, rooted in profound love, which cultivates wonder, imagination, and the courage to act. Adapting to the COVID-19 pandemic has been difficult for many bricks and mortar congregations. Early on in the pandemic, we were in a unique position to assist many congregations with the transition. We hosted special episodes of The VUU, provided advice and counseling to religious professionals, and trained congregations for live streaming worship, all while providing robust online programming for our members. From worship to covenant groups, from classes to pastoral care, and from our monthly magazine to our letter writing ministry, we have found ways to build connection and community even through the screen. We have been a model for ministry on the margins, providing services for isolated Unitarian Universalists, becoming a spiritual lifeline for our members in prison, and investing in innovative ministry. We know better than anyone how deep and meaningful connections can be formed even from a distance. Unitarian Universalists have faced many challenges in these times, and we continue to persevere and to fight for justice and equity for all people, especially during moments of crisis. We are proud to be a leader in this faith movement, and we invite you to get involved in our ministry. We strive to be a place where anyone from anywhere can find spiritual refuge anytime they need it. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of the Larger Fellowship. We are so excited to bring you an all-new episode of The VUU. The VUU is a weekly Unitarian Universalist talk show discussing important faith-based topics from an anti-racist, anti-oppressive, and multicultural perspective. Every Thursday for the past 7 years, we have welcomed guests from every corner of the world. Our guests are writers, scholars, activists, and religious thought leaders who are shaping Unitarian Universalism and society for the 21st century and beyond. I hope today's show inspires you. Hope it builds your faith. Hope it gives you perspective to see the power of Unitarian Universalism at work in your life. Enjoy the message.
I always imagine that I'm taking a really groovy walk with Arthur from that TV show whenever I hear that music. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be. For those of you who don't know me, my name is QuianaDenae Perkins. I am physically in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And I am excited to be the person to start the Voices of Unitarian Universalism today, which we also call the VUU, which I call the VUU. And I'm just excited to be here with my comrades and community. I am going to kick it over to my buddy in Seattle, my friend Aisha.
Hi, I'm Aisha Hauser, and I'm in Seattle, Washington. And yesterday I read something, and whatever I was reading was referencing the show The VUU, the one on TV, and I'm like, they spelled that wrong. So, yeah. It's gray here. It was sunny yesterday. Even the weather here is passive aggressive. So that's me in Seattle, Washington, on the land of the Coast Salish people, also specifically the Duwamish. So Michael, throwing it over to you on the other coast.
Hi, everyone. Michael Tino joining you from Peekskill, New York, the land of the Kitchewan and Wappinger bands of the Lenape Nation. It is kind of gray today here, too. But it's almost 80 degrees, so I'm in short sleeves, and the windows are open, and I'm hoping that there's not a whole lot of pollen being blown into my house. It's time to plant my vegetable garden, y'all, and the asparagus is sprouting, and the lilac is blooming right outside this window right here. It smells like heaven, and That's what's going on here. DC Fortune, how are you?
It doesn't light up in red like it does in my other things. It just has it like, so I don't see it. Anyway, I'm moving. Like, so my whole life is in disarray. The clothes that aren't moving, clothes are in a box somewhere. And I have somebody helping me in the kitchen right now, cleaning in ways that I neither have the skill nor the inclination to do, for the people who are buying my house on Monday. So here in South Jersey, it's gray, not unlike Michael, but it's cold. It's like 60 degrees. And, you know, I'm like, April, come back and get your weather because you left it here. You know, this is just a little bit nuts. But anyway, so I'm here, and I'm looking forward to eventually having all of this stuff in boxes in some way, shape, or form. So I'm excited for today's show, and I'm excited that QuianaDenae has a great way to lead it off. So I'm going to hand it back to QuianaDenae.
Uh-oh, that means it's trouble. No, it doesn't. So it is. I'm really excited to have this guest here with us today for a couple of reasons. One, I got to spend time with them at Finding Our Way Home on the planning committee. So I've had the pleasure and the opportunity to get to know them on a really personal level. So there's somebody who I admire in that frame. But I'm excited about the dialogue today. As many of you know, I'm a seminarian, which is very serious. But one of the things I'm learning is really like a better history of Unitarian Universalism, but also a better understanding of how we relate to our inner, how we are practicing multi-religiosity and how we're practicing being good neighbors to a community of faiths. And what I'm finding is you use a lot of us, and I'll count myself in that mixture. We are not just Unitarian Universalists. We are very fine adding an and, a plus, an adjacent, and I am both simultaneously. So with that energy, I want to let Reverend Summer come onto the screen, let them introduce themselves, give us a little history, tell us where you are, tell us about your weather, and then we'll kick it off with some questions and explore a little bit about how we can be our best selves with our Muslim kindred.
Thank you, QuianaDenae. Oh, we had so much fun with planning and finding our way home. And I hope for those who were there that it was special and as wonderful and healing as I felt it was. I'm so happy to be here. I am the Reverend Summer Albayati, she, her pronouns, and I live in Corona, California, which is in Southern California in Riverside County on the sacred lands of the Juaneño and Luiseño. And I also am, I serve as congregational life field staff for the Pacific Western region at the Unitarian Universalist Association. And we just kicked off a class with Church of the Larger Fellowship, a partnership with Church of the Larger Fellowship, yes, and the UU of Ann Arbor. Ann Arbor happens to be where my mom grew up, and she went to University of Michigan. So yeah, so there's that connection. Yeah, so shout out to Ann Arbor, y'all. Yeah, so anyway, we kicked off this class, the 3-week session on Islam and Unitarian Universalism. So I'm really excited to be here to talk about what we're going to talk about, how to be, as you said, good neighbors. Thank you, Kiana. Oh, and it is sunny. Sorry, y'all. It's sunny. It's sunny. It says it's 68 degrees outside. We shall see where that takes us. But it is sunny and beautiful and a little breezy. So anyway.
Give our conversation some context and some safety frames, right? Excuse me. One of the things that we were talking about pre-show that I want to interject right in this moment is that Islamic faith is not a monolith. The voices you're hearing in this space are the voices of those people who have that lived experience, and that's the experience they're speaking from. There is no way Reverend Summer or Aisha could speak for everyone. And so just have that in your container, right? Like that's part of our conversation. And also the other thing I want to just lay out here is that we get to have this conversation. Like this isn't a bad conversation or a good conversation. We need spaces to talk about, wow, I need to go get something to drink. I'm sorry, y'all. I put this in the chat because y'all couldn't see it. I was like, oh my gosh, I just went and brushed my teeth, and now all I have with me is coffee. I was like, wasn't my best move. Focus. So I want to just come back around and say the frame is that they cannot speak for everybody, and that this is a healthy conversation, and the intent is to have a healthy outcome. So whatever you might know or might think or might have mixed into the batter, that's not in our cake. The cake we're making is one of love and one of understanding. So having said that, I open the floor to Reverend Summer to just talk a little about your dual identity, the way that you get to be these two beautiful things simultaneously, unapologetically.
Wow, that is a good question. How do I get to be this dual identity? Well, I think it begins with my amazing experience within what I would say spaces of music, right? So for me, I grew up with what one might think is sort of the aesthetic of Islam, right? So I always knew growing up that what we were to create was interfaith dialogue, right? We were to be together with so many different identities, whether that meant people coming with a religious, different religious identity, cultural identity, um, uh, uh, identity in terms of gender, right? So I grew up in these spaces. So what type of spaces am I talking about? I grew up in what we call Arabic nightclubs, right? I was born in Hollywood, California, but I was dancing in the womb of my mother to the music of my father, Saadun Albayati, who has passed away, Allah yarhamo. And I was called to perform music with him at the age of 12. I started at the age of 2, y'all. So I just want you to know that at the age of 2, he was doing a concert. Some people put a tambourine in my hand, right? And I started playing it. They put me on the stage. My father had no idea. Apparently, I was able at the age of 2 to drum perfectly, which is amazing, right? So then 10 years later, at the age of 12, I pick up a drum. We had our own Arabic nightclub at that time, and I started drumming, and that launched me into a career of drumming professionally with my father and creating sacred music and sacred spaces. So that is sort of in a nutshell where I come from, and that's how I'm able to hold two identities, right? So as I got called to ministry, what did that mean, right? What did that mean? I was taught that we were created from the Quran into nations and tribes so we could get to know one another. And that is something that I hold dear. That is the ayah that talks about interfaith dialogue. So that's how I got to Unitarian Universalism and can hold a dual identity. I hope that answers your question, QuianaDenae.
Very much so. I think sometimes we have this impression that these things happen kind of in a silo or on their own, that you had one identity and then you came into another. But it sounds like you had a true dual experience of things always kind of merging and flowing together. I want to turn the floor over to my friend Aisha, who I think maybe had a different experience.
I mean, I think yes, I did. I was born in Egypt. My entire family is Muslim, and I think I had two at one point grandparents who married non-Muslim women as a result of colonization, a French woman and a British woman way back down the line. I think it's Summer's one of my friends. I adore you, and I love the beautiful experience you had, and that's what I hope for kind of wider. Iraq, fun fact, was until the US decided to decimate it, the most progressive Muslim country for women, like the most progressive. And so that's like, I was so pissed for a lot of reasons because I'm against war. But I'm like, if you're gonna bomb a country, bomb the one where women aren't allowed to drive. Like, anyway. So I don't think you should bomb any country, but if you're gonna, anyway, I digress. So I come from much more of a, I do say fundamentalist because that's how I experienced it. Orthodox. I mean, I don't. I usually associate the word Orthodox with the Jewish faith. However, it's the same idea that it's a very strict, oppressive interpretation of the Quran. And so my family, my mother especially, covered from when she was 17, went to the Hajj when she was 17. My Egyptian's a little different, my Arabic than Iraqi Arabic, so I pronounce things a little differently. But so I grew up very much, I mean, slut shamed from most of my childhood, and disowned when I married my when I wasn't even marrying, dating my Jewish husband, threatened with death. So I found Unitarian Universalism. Actually, I was 20 when I first visited the first one, and then came back in my 30s, and then, just decided, especially for my family and my children, I wanted to be part of a pluralist faith. And the invitation for Unitarian Universalists, and for me too, is here's the question, because I've encountered this more with Christians, because we don't have many, I don't think, recovering or open-minded Muslims as much as we do Christians and Jewish folks. I do not call myself a UU Muslim, very intentionally. I do not. That is not how I live my life. The threading the needle is embracing the liberal part of Islam, the part that people have really, reclaimed, and that is the LGBTQ mosque, the mosque run by women. That is beautiful and gives me hope, and not gaslight people into saying, like, when I hear somebody say that's not Islam, it hurts my heart. I'm like, well, it kind of is for a lot of people, and it's not. And there's still honor killings. It's 2022, and there's still places where females are being murdered. My sister just said to me, about going back to Egypt, they're taking cell phones from people they think are part of the LGBTQ community. So there's still horrific human rights violations happening in 2022 in the name of Islam. Sure. I mean, Christianity the book is fine. Like, you know what I mean? It's not, there's a spectrum. So how do we help people heal from spiritual and religious violence in a way that holds their pain and doesn't stay, because Christianity has been used as a weapon, because there's a lot of in the Bible that can be used as a weapon. Same with Quran. Like, a lot of it's been used as a weapon because it's there to be used as a weapon. So it's not either or. It's knowing that these books are written by people. They're made up, like all religions are, because humans are trying to figure out why we're here, right? The existential question. And so that's been something I've asked myself, like how I've been working on my healing. I'm not, it may be something it will be something I work on my whole life. It was that damaging. And I do want to embrace and affirm the parts of all, the parts of me that want to, not hold on to just the pain. But so anyway, I'm going on and on. So how do we hold people, honor the pain they lived through, without gaslighting them? I guess that's my question, because it's true with Christianity as well. This isn't just Islam. There's a whole deconstruction movement in Christianity that's taken hold on social media, and I've been following a lot of those folks, and a lot of their stories are similar to mine, except theirs was with the cross and Jesus, and mine was with the Quran and Islam and Muhammad,
Right.
So.
Right. Well, and thank you for bringing that up, because yes, so I forgot to say I'm Iraqi, right? So I forgot to say that part. So thank you, Aisha, for bringing that up. And as we know, we used this horrible experience that I hear in the past few months. I've heard every single week, and so I'm going to name it just again, because we're not anywhere near September 11th. But for some reason, the past few months, I've heard September 11th uttered in spaces that I've been in every single week. And so I wonder, is that because I'm in the space, right? And is that subconscious, or is that something else, right? So just to put that out there, right? 9/11 was used as an excuse to go and bomb and obliterate Iraq, so killing a million people or more, right? So I lost a lot of family, and a lot of family was created as refugees. So I just want to state that that is also an experience that I come with, and I agree. That was right. There were more women PhDs in Iraq than anywhere else, certainly than in the United States and all of the Middle East. So there is something to that, right? Like that was a place back in time that was considered the cradle of learning, the cradle of civilization, right? Where people were learning. It was a dynamic place, Baghdad, which is where my father is from. But you brought up something, right? Like, is it religion or is it patriarchy? I want to hold that question, right? Because Islam does not say that you can do honor killings. As a matter of fact, the Prophet Muhammad, right, peace be upon him, right, came and said, stop killing, do not kill, because they were the pre-Islamic Arabs were practicing what do they call it, female infanticide, right? They were killing female babies, right? So those who were identified, I mean, we're talking long time ago, patriarchy, right? Like so in terms of gender, were they talking about gender, right? Questions there. So what is it, right, that continues with the patriarchy, right, that allows for patriarchy? And like you said, you did bring up there's the women's mosque, there are LGBTQIA plus mosques, right? Like I spent time for Eid, right, with these spaces. I spent time just Saturday with Muslim Progressive Values in LA, right? And I just want to say, as sort of a response, Aisha, you said something about, progressive Muslim, that I would dare to say that a lot of Muslims in Unitarian Universalism, those that hold the dual identity, are progressive, right? So we're here, and some bring trauma and others don't. And how do we widen that circle even more for those who are attracted to Unitarian Universalism, but then they're not feeling safe in these spaces, right?
I guess, which makes me want to lean in. One, I want to make sure that Michael and DC, if you want to chime in at all, but I also wanted to say, it sounds like I've heard some emails. I've seen some emails about the class. So could you talk a little bit, because I think some of the tools that we have at our disposal to get better educated and to be in better relationship and connection with each other is the class that you all are offering right now. So could you talk a little bit about how that class came about and how you all, what's happening in those spaces for folks who join you in that class?
That is a great question. Aisha, do you want to talk about how the concept of this class came about?
Sure, but it was your idea. I think it was you and Manish. It was Manish. It was Manish, Reverend Manish Mishra Marzetti. Yeah, who so Manish and Reverend Nancy McDonald Ladd are working on a book called Wow, Building a New Way, because Summer and I are in the book. so yeah, I know the book we're in. And so Summer's chapter is a compelling one about this. My chapter is different, is on collaborative leadership, and Summer, your chapter is on Islam and welcoming Muslims, more Muslims into Unitarian Universalism. And so I got an email, and Manish said, why doesn't, would Ann Arbor, would the CLF want to join with Ann Arbor to present a class? And so I don't co-teach the class. I don't co-lead it. Summer and Reverend Mellon Kennedy you both co-lead it. So I did attend yesterday, and I definitely, in full transparency, I have a lot of work to do around Islam that I will do the rest of my life. And I appreciate what you bring. I do. So,
Habibti,
I love you,
I know,
Summer.
I love you too, Habibti. Yeah, no, it's so we started off, talking about Islamophobia, right? Which, or anti-Muslim sentiment, or for me, as I'm not only, I hold the other identity, right? I'm not just Muslim, right? I'm Arab, right? And so I hold that identity together because, as we know, Islam, 1.8 billion Muslims in the world. They're not all, Arab. They're not, right? Like the majority of them are in Indonesia, right? So if y'all didn't know that, right? Like, whoa, hello, everybody. Indonesia has more Muslims than, Arab countries, right? And so what does that mean, right? What does that mean? And so when I come with that identity, right? So I'm coming from that experience. And so when we talk about it, right, like for me, there's also the part that is anti-Arab, right? And a recognition that people do not think that there are Christian Arabs, there are Jewish Arabs, right? All Arabs are not Muslim, just by the way, right? Like we got Buddhist Arabs, we got them all. We got them all, right? And but they're paired together, right? And that was my experience growing up in this country, right? That whatever, right? It was the bad Arab on the screen, the bad Muslim on the screen, right? So we talked a little bit about the fact that this is an industry, right? Millions of dollars are spent to make sure that you all fear Muslims. Millions, if not, I'd venture to say billions, right? But to be able to document that, is going to be a little more challenging. That said, right, that's something in which we need to also look at our own, right? Like our own fear of Muslims, our own anti-Muslimness, that because we're all in this culture, right? Just as we're trying to dismantle white supremacy culture and work on anti-racism, anti-oppression work, right? Like we need to be understanding, right, that we also have received this messaging. And it continues today. It continues all the time. I mean, I gave you all evidence. I didn't give you scholarly research evidence. I gave you experience, my experience of the past few months of every week somebody bringing up 9/11 when I'm in the room, right? That's my lived experience. That's been my lived experience all of my life. That said, I focus on what do scholars say, and in particular, Muslim scholars. There are a lot of scholars out there that are good, right? But let's look at Muslim scholars because they're the ones that are bringing the nuances that others are not because they have already been shaped by the messaging, right? So I just want to throw that out there because this class is wonderful. But we also have to be aware that there are people that will enter these spaces, especially when it comes to Islam, and bring up things that may or may not be true, and they will not back it up with excellent scholarship. And I hold that up to be very, very important. So that's where I come from with that.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. You talked about, you said something that triggered a question for me. You were saying, being Arab and being Muslim are two different realities. I think, so I'm going to speak about my experience. Growing up, I knew a lot of people who had engaged Islam after prison. And so that was their filter, not good or bad, but their experience of it started in that incarceration cycle and then it carried back into the community. So I've always had an understanding and a respect. And I also, because I'm Black, folks assume I'm either Muslim or Christian, which is a really interesting thing because I'm neither. And so I've always had a healthy respect for Islamic practices and food, stuff, and knowing when Ramadan is. How can I go from being more than just somebody who's respectful of my siblings in faith and be more, I don't know if the word opening or welcoming is the best term, but how can I really live into my aspiration of being a good spiritual sibling to other folks, particularly folks who are experiencing layers like Summer you were just talking about, who are still experiencing harm, right? Like it's not like it's 2022 and we're still talking about 9/11. No, you know what I'm saying? Like, how do I help you when you're actively being harmed, and how can I be good? Very selfish question, but it's real for me.
That's a good question, QuianaDenae. Thank you for that. You know, I really
Offer, make sure that I don't schedule a meeting, at the time of sundown. Like, I feel like there's so
right,
much
right.
more depth that we could be offering, and I don't want to be that shallow anymore.
Yeah, yeah. And I appreciate that. And I think a part of it is really to immerse yourself in what I've already stated, right? Really good scholarship, right? Um, and I grew up, so just so you know, like I grew up, my mom had studied Islam in graduate school as well. And um, so a part of my learning was to have really good scholars on our bookshelves, and we had a tremendous amount of bookshelves, and like y'all, we got a lot of books. Okay, I just want you to know that, right? Like a little too much, but it's all good. It's all good. And so I learned a lot like about feminist Islam, right? Like that was my go-to, right? So when I was learning as much as possible, I was learning from scholars as well as the lived experience, right? Um, and so I would encourage anybody who's interested, right, to really look at what scholars have to say, to go deeper. This is a very deep religion, right? And this religion is, like our Unitarian Universalism is supposed to be a covenantal faith, right? It's a living faith, right? We are meant to change and grow. Islam is the same. And that we can see by evidence of the fact that Muslim scholars have been debating since the beginning of, Islam to today, and changing and growing. And so Islam is also changing. It is not necessarily, set in this is what it's supposed to be. And so I encourage that, right? Like really interacting with the scholarship, and then being able to, creating safe spaces is one way, right? Like, so we talked a little bit about the fact that, it's unfortunate, and maybe I should have given y'all a heads up on this, and I didn't, and that's my bad, and I apologize for that, because you know, but we do experience what we call trolls in Muslim spaces, whether it be online, whether it be in physical spaces, right? And so we experienced a little bit of that. And I want to go on record to apologize to anybody that was in that space that felt harmed by that. Because we had Muslims in that space, we also had other Unitarian Universalists, and that can be really, really hard, right? It can be hard to feel completely welcome, right? When that type of experience is happening. And how do we, as Unitarian Universalists, intentionally create safe spaces, right? So for instance, when I was invited to participate in Eid online in a safe space that is progressive Muslims and queer affirming, I had to answer some questions. Luckily, I was known, right? But there are ways in which they put up uh, the protections, right, to ensure. There are other spaces. Yeah, there are other spaces in which um, uh, they say you must come in with your video on, like you're not allowed to come in to the space without your video on, right? Like these type of ways in which we provide safety online. How we do it in person, I don't know. Good question.
Friends, I wanted to one of the questions I asked in the background that I think is important is, Reverend Michael, could you talk a little bit about the work that CLF does around supporting our Muslim brothers and sisters who are incarcerated, and how this class is supportive of that work as well?
Sure, and Aisha might be able to also contribute here. We are in the midst of developing some more courses for our incarcerated members. As many of you out there know, the Church of the Larger Fellowship serves about 1,600 incarcerated Unitarian Universalists right now, and that number grows like every week. Like that's 20 more than it was last month. It's amazing, and awe-inspiring in the real word, like way in which awe is meant. Like it's fearful, fearsome, almost, to be able to be accountable to serving that many people in experiencing incarceration right now. And what we've heard from our incarcerated members is that they want tools to be able to understand and appreciate and interact with different theologies, to understand their Unitarian Universalism as a both and faith that invites in the different theological ways of experiencing the world, and also um, to be uh, Unitarian Universalists in their prison environments. So to be the people in their prison environments that connect with folks of other theologies. And as you mentioned, QuianaDenae, there are many people who are incarcerated for whom Islam is a theology that they discover in prison. So our incarcerated members have actually asked us for a course on Unitarian Universalism and Islam. And this class that Summer and Melon are teaching right now is actually what we're hoping will kick off the development of that class. So we're sort of piloting this with our Free World members and with the folks in Ann Arbor, as a way of understanding, well, what are the real questions? What are the real issues? What are the stumbling blocks? Where do the trolls? Uh, and the people. I don't like necessarily the word trolls, but where do the people who do not have the best of intentions in mind enter the conversation, and how do we stop their bad intentions from harming other people, um, so that when we bring this course to our incarcerated members, we've thought all of those things through, and we can give them something that helps them appreciate and understand uh, Islamic theology and the practices of their Muslim uh, fellow incarcerated people, and helps them maybe find a both and theology in their lives as well. So this is part of it. We're also developing courses on humanism and paganism for our incarcerated members as well, and that those will be different shows, beloved. Those will be different shows. We don't need to go down that road.
I think the conversation about multi-religiosity is so important. I was doing a little school assignment. I'm on UU theology, and I was able to incorporate some of the messages from Brother Baba Abraham, who was at Star King, who was the provost at Star King School for the Ministry, and just really, one, just to listen to his voice and to listen to his words is such a powerful thing. Like a half an hour had gone by, and I was like, oh, I have to go do something else, but he has so much wisdom about being multi-religious and being in your core and being in your truth, that it just, to not include that information and that view of Islam and multi-religiosity in my homework felt like inappropriate. DC, so just know that, go ahead, Michael.
Well, I'm not on the screen yet. So one of the things I think is worth mentioning is that whenever institutional power is being abused, the abuse of institutional power that religions are a part of enters into the picture. And so one of the things our incarcerated members tell us again and again, and one of the things we have to realize and be accountable to, is the ways in which the carceral state as an institution of abuse, of an institution of harm, amplifies the harm that patriarchy and racism that is part of religion, and part of a little thread through every religion does in the world, right? So our incarcerated members exist in these institutions that are harming them daily and are faced with a theological environment that is um, amplifying the worst messages of Christianity and the worst messages of Islam because of the nature of the carceral state. And so we're trying to the give our people the counter to that. We're trying to give our people space for their theology to heal, and it's one of the reasons why our prison ministry is expanding so quickly. Is because they tell their friends, "Hey, there's this church that's not trying to like step on us or make us ugly or make us hate each other. There's this church that is trying to love us and affirm our inherent worth." Um,
I want
so
to.
it's in that environment that this is happening.
So, Michael, I am so glad that you stopped me. I was on a different bus, but you put me on this. I think that's super because I'll get on any bus, right? Like I'm at the bus station, just take me somewhere. But you took me to a brand new place, which is that there's a lot of overlap in the harm that's trying to be done, right? Because it's not just systemic harm from being incarcerated; it's spiritual harm. There's a bunch of layers going on, which makes me want to bring in something Summer said earlier before we start talking. We talk about layers. You said, Summer, that there was a political thing that happened around something yesterday. I'm leaving there's a lot of breadcrumbs on the floor, Summer, so help me out here. You were saying something didn't happen in the Senate, but it also made me think this might be a really good space for us to talk about reproductive choice as it pertains to any particular faith, but also maybe explicitly to Islam. So I hope everyone followed that little bunny trail. Systems of harm. How are those systems still acting? How does that action of harm play out in uteruses and law and faith?
Mhm. Well, that is a great question, QuianaDenae. So when it comes to the right to choose abortion, right? Islam is for abortion, right? Especially if it is going to harm the vessel. I'm going to call it the vessel, right? That is carrying a child, this precious body carrying a child, right? And so, there are various schools of thought about this, right? The majority of the schools of thought say, yes, abortion is okay. And then there could be like, certain months and what have you. And, oh, is it, there are those who say, well, if it's just because you're poor, that's not, that's not a good excuse, right? But everything else, right? Like if it's going to bring harm, and guess who gets to decide whether that's going to bring harm, right? Like you as the person. So the personhood is very, very important in Islam. Like I said, the Prophet brought this idea. We don't, kill our infant. We don't do feminine infanticide, right? So, so I think that's really, really important because we have those who are trying to take away our rights, right? And we watched a little video that talked about the intersectionality of it all, right? In terms of there are a lot of states, especially those that are Republican, right, that have enacted laws that are anti-Sharia, right? They don't even know what Sharia law is, right? But they've enacted that. And then they've tacked on to it anti-abortion laws, right? So they've used that as an excuse to further, right? To further oppress um, uh, those who would have autonomy over their bodies, right? And then it's connected to anti-trans, anti-immigration, like all of these things. Everything is interconnected. So so I think what we're seeing is that is something which we all need to get on the bus, as you said, QuianaDenae, right? To fight like, I'm gonna be all PC and say the Dickens, fight like the Dickens, but y'all know what I'm really saying. Fight like what? What we need to fight like what, Aisha? I was sharing earlier that
Aisha's in charge of
right. I was
profanity.
sharing earlier. Yes, that's true. I was sharing earlier that I tried to curb my profanity because my son and I have a podcast called The Bayat Beat that we in which he is the cursor, and so I try to hold back. So I'm holding back, but fight like you know what, because they are coming after all of our rights, right? And so that is so dealing with that intersectionality piece, right? Like how do we deal with that? And we may have gone down a rabbit hole with that. I apologize, but I wanted to lift that up because
There's
that
no
is
rabbit
being
holes in here.
discussed. Right.
But I
Yeah,
do want to
right.
make sure my friend DC gets on the bus with us. DC, you
Yes,
coming on the
DC.
bus?
Come on the bus with that.
Yeah, I'm coming. Yeah, I'm coming on the bus. One of the things I'm thinking about as I'm hearing this, and I'm trying to translate it into language that I understand, and that comes from my very New England Irish Catholic experience, and there are a lot of people for whom Catholicism is really beautiful and really salvific and really life-giving. That is Octavius Brooks Frothingham, otherwise known as, and even, yes, and Catholicism even liberatory. And for me growing up, the part of that whole experience that I remember was when we said every week and every morning during Lent, I am not worthy. And so I know that for some who experience Catholicism as liberation, as freedom, as relief from as salvation from eternal damnation, there are those of us who hear that joy and it still stings, and I know that happens for folks who have grown up in certain Jewish communities, and I know that happens for folks who have grown up in certain Christian Protestant communities, and I know that happens for people who have grown up in certain Muslim communities, where, and I just want to speak into this space that any of our, and Unitarian Universalist communities, right? Like we are not exempt from this, because we, as Unitarian Universalism, are a system of power and authority. And the primary role of any system of power and authority is to preserve and perpetuate the system. And to preserve and perpetuate the system means to preserve and perpetuate the power to the powerful, and to disempower those who might threaten that system. Okay? And that is universal in any system of power, whether it's a government, whether it's a church, whether it's a family, whether it's corporation, whether it's whatever. Okay? And I think it's important, and I am delighted that you have had such a wonderful experience of Islam. That is a gift. That is a blessing. That is something I wish everyone could have, is that positive experience. In the same way, I wish everyone could have the positive experience that I know some of my friends from my Catholic childhood had of the Catholic Church as being life-saving and life-giving. And I cannot let go unspoken the Magdalene houses in Ireland, where girls who had the nerve to be unruly were put into workhouses that were labor camps for orphans in the name of Catholicism, in the name of salvation. And I have a dear friend who grew up in one of those places. And when I hear some of my family talk about how beautiful the Mass was, I keep in mind how that affected my friend Mary, who was horribly abused by the nuns because she had the nerve to be born out of wedlock in Ireland. Okay, so this is really complex, and I just need to speak that as joyful as I am at my Unitarian Universalist faith now, I am also aware that there is much that this faith does that hurts people, often wrapped up in issues of economic equality and economic justice, and in issues of institutional racism and white supremacy. We are not immune. And so I just want to name that celebratory language can be awesome. And we have to remember that sometimes, somewhere, somebody's hearing this and cringing. You know, when we talk about Islam, when we talk about Christianity, when we talk about Judaism, when we talk about Unitarian Universalism, when we talk about when we talk about the Democratic Party, when we talk about whatever, you know, there is so much complexity. And I just want to affirm and acknowledge there's so many layers of this. I think sometimes we run the risk of romanticizing a thing. Like I talk about my growing up poor, and people put it in this sort of, not Dickens, but who was the guy? Grapes of Wrath guy. Grapes of Wrath. Steinbeck, right? Right. People put it in this sort of tragic, honorable novel, when really all it was a bunch of terribly anxious, angry people drinking to not hurt and to try and pay the bills, you know? And so I just want to, like me, I'm always the one, like here, me offering, we need to temper this. Yeah, because I'm the voice of temperance, totally. But I just want to acknowledge that these conversations are painful in all directions, and that doesn't mean we don't have them. It doesn't mean we don't have them, but it means that we need to hold one another gently, you know, as we experience this, because what is joy for you is pain for me. What is joy for me might be painful for you. And I need to be gentle with my words, and I need others to I just want us to give each other that kind of grace and that kind of compassion.
Thank you,
QuianaDenae? Yeah.
I'm going to toss it to Aisha.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And I think that is the gift of a pluralist faith, of Unitarian Universalism. is to name the really hard truths and name. I really appreciated the framing of the complexity, DC, of how especially religion, it's so intimate and personal, and when it works really well for someone, awesome, and when someone's been abused by it, then that abuse is deep because it's intimate. And so I appreciate, and that's where how Unitarian Universalism can be a place where we can how we can spiritually heal only when we name the truth. We cannot spiritually heal if we only embrace. I love Taizé, but I don't, when I know, most of the Catholics I know, not most, but yeah, actually most probably that I know personally, that would share their life story with me, have been horribly abused by Catholicism. So I don't say, oh my gosh, Taizé is great. I just know I like the Taizé services. Anyway, so I think that's the invitation and the beauty of Unitarian Universalism. We can offer a class on Introduction to Islam for UUs, that we can grapple with what it means to heal from spiritual wounds, because human beings were wired for religion, whether or not we like it. Even our friends, the join the Ethical Culture Society, or join badminton club. We are wired to be connected, and that connection is spiritual, whether or not we call it that. So this has been amazing, and Reverend Summer Albayati, shukran min elbi. Thank you for coming. You are a joy for me, and I appreciate you, and I have since the second I met you. And QuianaDenae, great job, as you always do, with hosting, and DC and Michael. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate you.
Habibti, can I say one thing? This has
Sure.
been beautiful. And I want to say, naming it is a beginning, right? That is the first movement towards healing. What else do we need to do? And maybe there needs to be a follow-up podcast on how are we going to really deepen that healing for Unitarian Universalists that are suffering from, trauma in whatever shape or form. I think we do a lot of naming, but are we doing a lot of healing? And so I just want to place that, because I think that is, we don't have time for another hour, but because I have another meeting, but I'm just saying, maybe a future podcast. Thank you. This was beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Special thanks to those of you who give generously to this ministry. It is because of you that this ministry is possible. You can click the link in the description to give now, or visit clfuu.org/give for more information. We hope you will join us next week for another episode of The VUU.